one of his primary successes and things that he works on is being the principal investigator and lead of the XSEDE project for the National Science Foundation. And he is going to give us an update on XSEDE and also some things that maybe XSEDE in the future. So it's my honor to introduce John Towns, and go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. I'm actually going to surprise you a little bit too on what I'm going to do here, Bill. So hopefully I don't get you too far off guard.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, you got to wake people up at the end just to give them something to finish on. So let me start with who does not know what XSEDE is. Thanks, Tom. I can always count on you, man. So I'm given that no one raised their hand and either they were not brave enough to do so or whatnot, I'm going to kind of skip through my first slides pretty quickly, assuming you have a general idea of what it is, because there's two other things I want to get to. So I can say all kinds of nice things about where we're at right now, but we've been given a nice opportunity by NSF that I want to talk about, and then the surprise for Bill at the end. Okay, so just as a little context, XSEDE is an award from NSF under what they call the Extreme Digital Solicitation. Its official name is there, and the solicitation number is there. And it's really intended to be very much in line with NSF's vision and strategy documents. These are documents you may have seen before, so there's references to these here. Most importantly, the SIF 21 and the ACI Vision and Strategic Plan. And if you read those documents and see what XSEDE's doing, you'll see an amazing amount of alignment, hopefully. At this point in the symposium, reading vision and mission statements is probably only going to make people glassy-eyed. So I won't force you to do that. I will say a couple things, though, about what our strategic goals are for the project. And the first one is really about deepening and extending use of cyber infrastructure across many different disciplinary areas. So for those communities that are already making use of these sorts of resources and services, but also reaching to new communities and doing work in workforce development and raising the value, the awareness of the value of these sorts of things more generally. And actually, very nice. There was some reference to the Cadence project that Donna Cox is leading. She's here in the back of the room. That's one of our means of making the community more aware of not just the scientific successes that are out there, but how is it that the sorts of things that we do with XSEDE, the sorts of things that are done with the Blue Waters project and the resources and services they provide, why are they important to these scientific successes? Often the stories are the scientific successes themselves, but we don't talk much about how we get to those successes and what's important to support that. Advancing the ecosystem, the cyber infrastructure ecosystem, so really creating an infrastructure for folks to plug into, and also I think often in the talks that we've heard throughout the symposium, and Luda just did it at the end, invariably there's a thanks to the technical staff that support a lot of that work, and we want to continue to develop that staff, broaden the expertise that's available to make it available to the community. And then sustaining that ecosystem. So we operate an infrastructure, we interconnect a lot of computing resources with a focus on those that are what we call Track 2 style awards. I know that's not the program that NSF uses anymore, but that's the colloquialism we know as. So these are things like Stampede or Comet or some coming systems like Jetstream and Bridges. So providing access to those and supporting those. Is a big part of what we do. Here's some other pieces of information you may not know. It's a fairly large project. It's a 5-year, $121 million project. It has an associated, a separate award for what's called the Technology Investigation Service, which goes and looks to identify new and emerging technologies for insertion into the ecosystem to support the identified needs of the research community. An important part of our cooperative agreement with NSF is there is a clause in there that indicates a major review of the project after the 3rd year, based upon which NSF can make a decision to extend the project in some way, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. To be clear, because it's often very difficult to tell from the user community perspective, XSEDE doesn't actually own or operate any hardware itself. Those are done through separate awards that NSF makes to institutions, and we integrate them into the environment, provide a lot of support around them, and the integration function across of them. But there is of order $100 million in other awards that are going along that are supporting these sorts of resources for the community. XSEDE itself is about 250 individuals at 20 institutions in 5 time zones, so a highly distributed project. And since we don't operate any hardware, there's a lot of activities that we manage. So there's a lot of partnering going on. There's a lot of tracking of the details of what folks are doing. So there's our plans annually are really about activities that we're going to engage in, and they're fairly extensive. Just to give you a sense of the research enterprise that we support, this is a little bit older data, but I didn't update it, but it'll be time to update it very shortly as we're closing our program year 3. But for the prior program year, when you go and look at the awards that we have been supporting in that period of time, there's about $750 million in funded research that XSEDE has supported in one way or another during that 12-month period. So it's quite a high level of leverage and quite a bit of research activity that has some support through XSEDE one way or another. So a little bit of what is XSEDE, I think people probably have a sense of this, but there's sort of 3 ways to look at it. One is that it is this ecosystem of services and resources that are enabling folks, but it's also a virtual organization that has some interesting characteristics to it, being highly distributed. It creates some challenges in bringing coherence to the project overall, in that folks are at so many institutions and across so many time zones. And so we've actually faced some interesting management and governance issues within the project itself, and have done some interesting work in that space. The other is that we're really trying to be out front, sort of forging how this stuff is done in the first place. There really is no other project that is quite the same scope and scale as XSEDE is. There are similar projects around the world that cover parts of what we do and have perhaps large scale, but don't have the same scope. So it's a fairly complicated thing that we're doing, and I think that we have done a lot to show how to do this the right way. So here's a sense of who's involved in this project. You probably recognize those institutions that are in the upper right, who are the primary partners in this. But when we formed the project, we realized that not all the capabilities, particularly the expertise that we needed, existed just at those 4 centers of NCSA, NICS, Pittsburgh, or 5 centers, Pittsburgh, TAC, and SDSC. So there was a collection of additional institutions that we engaged with to bring in some of these other areas of expertise into the project to complement what was coming from the major partners. So in fact, it's a much bigger set of participants that are in this than most people might be aware. And really, it's a very important part of what we do. Those additional institutions constitute about 20% of our funding, so it's pretty substantial. We do a lot of things. I'm not going to touch on these too hard, because I think you're familiar with some of this stuff, but obviously it's access to a variety of systems and of a variety of types. Including Open Science Grid. So for those that are familiar with Open Science Grid, we actually allocate some of their resources through our allocations process. So we sort of cover the gamut of many different types of resources that are available for allocation through our process. We do not allocate blue waters. As you know, it's done through a separate process. And that's done, of course, those are at a larger scale than any of the XSEDE resources that are available. The resources are interconnected by a network that we get through contracting with Internet 2, their advanced layer 2 services. All of the sites are at least at a 10 gigabit connection, but many are moving to 100 gigabit connectivity into that environment. And we support a significant data transfer between those institutions, and then also out to the institutions, the home institutions of the researchers who are making use of those resources. So it's a fairly significant effort in that area too. I'm not going to touch on this too much, other than to say that, you know, we're integrating these things we call advanced digital services, and most times people interpret that to mean computers, or storage devices. But there's a lot more to that in our use of that terminology. It's not just those, but it's lots of different types of resources and instruments that can be connected into the environment, but also the tools and support functions that go along with it. So that it's actually a continuously evolving and growing set of services that are important to the research process. We have a lot of interactions with the community. We've to date supported over 14,000 publications in the last nearly 4 years of operation of the project. As many of you may be aware, this is a follow-on to the TerraGrid project that preceded it. During the lifetime of that, I think there was less than 10,000 publications over the 8 or 9 year lifetime of that project. So we've really broadened the community that we're engaging. We're doing some interesting analysis on these publications to understand the impact that XSEDE has had beyond just the publications themselves. And as we develop that further, there'll be metrics that we're going to be using for indicating what that impact is. Another important aspect of the project is the campus champions. Are people familiar with what the campus champions are? Yes, people kind of know. So these are representatives on the campuses that provide local support, also facilitate them getting access to XSEDE allocated resources. That's a pretty large organization which has largely taken on a life of its own. There are more than 240 champions at more than 185 institutions. That's a constantly growing numbers. We don't actually even market it. It grows on organically. People approach us every week or so. We've got another institution that approaches us that are interested in participating in this. This has been a fantastically successful part of the project and provides a lot of support in bringing new folks into the environment. Just a sense of the scale of users that we support. There's a couple different things in here, but really the most important one is sort of the red line that goes in there. So on a monthly basis, we have of order 5,500 or more users that make use of XSEDE resources through two primary mechanisms. One is direct login, which is what you're familiar with doing with Blue Waters, but we also support a significant amount of users through Science Gateways, which are application portals and with other tools that allow people to use these web-based interfaces to conduct their work and don't actually themselves tend to log into those resources. That's done on the back end for them, and results are returned to them through those web interfaces. There's many other things that we do. We have a user portal. Folks may be familiar with that. Something you may not know is that probably true for the last 12 months, over 90,000 training registrations in a year. Now, if you compare those numbers across the two slides, there's a whole lot of folks that we're doing training for that don't necessarily use the resources that we allocate. So there's this much broader impact that we have. We have a lot of online information. There's a fair bit out there that may be of interest to you, particularly as you have new graduate students and such that are coming into your group that are unfamiliar with these sorts of tools and services. I recommend you take a look at that. We do a considerable amount of support in the community, not the least of which we process about 10,000 service requests a year that come through our ticketing system and through our help desk. So a lot of activity there. One of our most important functions is providing direct support to the research teams through what we call our ECSS, or Extended Collaborative Support Service, with a wide range of fields of expertise that are embodied in those technical experts. This is a not exhaustive list of many of the different areas of expertise that those staff have. I've highlighted on here in bold many of those that have emerged in the last few years as new fields or new areas of expertise that we've had to develop or bring into the project because of the evolving needs of the community. And this is an ongoing process. We continually are trying to understand what those evolving needs are of those that we're already working with, the communities we're working with, and new communities that are beginning to adopt the use of these sorts of resources to conduct their science. So that's an ongoing process, been very effective for us. I mentioned earlier that in our cooperative agreement we have this language that says at the end of 3 years we would have a major review. Well, as we're nearing the end of year 4 now, we had that major review last September. It was quite a good review. We had a very strong report from the panel. As you might expect, there's always recommendations for improvement. But the significant upshot of that is that based on this review and other considerations, NSF has extended to us an opportunity to write a renewal proposal to NSF. And this is pretty unique in that they've invited that renewal proposal without competition. That's a rather unusual thing, particularly at the scale that it's been invited. So we have the parameters of the proposal submission are here, so $100 to $120 million project again for another 5 years of funding. So it's a little bit less money than we had in the $130 million that we had for the current pair of projects. We have to cram this all into a 30-page proposal. It's 4.5 weeks and counting until it's due, so I've been doing a lot of phone calls on the side and things like that during this meeting as we develop that proposal, which is coming along rather nicely. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the priorities that we have for that, because we will evolve the project a bit as we go into that new period of funding. One of the most important things that we do, as I mentioned before, is this extended collaborative support service, and we will continue to provide this. Our review panel called it the crown jewel of what we do, and we do take a fair bit of pride in what we are doing with ECSS, and we do continue to bring in new fields of expertise. There are things on the horizon that we need to prepare for, not the least of which is a lot of these data-intensive applications that require support for analytics, but a lot of resources coming on have virtualization involved, whether they're using full VMs or containers, and a lot of work will be done in those in the future. So we're developing our expertise and bringing in some additional folks to help support those. When we see, so we have systems like Comet, which has recently come online, which supports a lot of virtualization. 2 new systems that will come online in January of 16, Bridges at Pittsburgh and Jetstream at Indiana and particularly Indiana, that's a cloud-based resource. So we'll be in the virtualized world and executing scientific applications in that environment. Support for that is still something challenging, but it's an interesting direction to move in, and we're preparing for that with the folks in Indiana. Another is something we call community infrastructure. So in the first 5-year project of XSEDE, we spent a lot of time building up this infrastructure that we've used to connect primarily the resources that have been provided through these Track 2 awards. And in the second round of the project, we're going to expose this architecture and this infrastructure to the broader community to allow people to bring services that they're developing and plug it into that infrastructure. And there's 2 things that are important there. One is that there are many capabilities that folks are developing in the community. They often want to share it with others. A challenge they face is making others aware of what they're offering. So one of the things that we will provide is an information service that allows discoverability of those services, layered on this infrastructure that allows us to be a connector of services across the community. So that research teams can then assemble the necessary services they need within that infrastructure, connected to many providers of services to assemble those in the ways that they need to accomplish their science. So we've put a lot of work into developing this to date, and we've made it work quite well for those resources that we allocate today. And exposing that has really been something that many people have been interested in, so that they can make their services available to the broader community more easily. And then some work towards sustainability. Typically when we talk about sustainability, or NSF asks for sustainability plans within their solicitations, they typically mean it somehow funds itself after the project is over. We have not been asked to do that specifically, but we also feel that there is a need to provide a means for providing access to these services in a persistent way, which must be backed by a sustainable funding model. not necessarily at funding itself in any particular way, but a model of funding that allows these services to persist and provide continuity so that there's no disruption to the community as they're trying to get their work done. They don't want to see services and resources disappear out from under them. So we will be exposing these services that we've developed in XSEDE. We will be providing access to other services that others provide. In some cases, we will be providing some of the services that we've developed for XSEDE to other projects. Many projects replicate a lot of the work that has been developed by others within their own context, and this has often been driven by reasonable means. Particularly, they're trying to drive their risks down as they develop their infrastructures. We're trying to find a model in which they can buy services at some incremental cost to support their specific projects beyond what we're supporting in XSEDE. The point here is not to make money, though. The point here is to allow projects to leverage the significant investment that's already been made in XSEDE that has already had as part of its pedigree support for a wide range of disciplines. And we have a number of folks who are interested in this. We're conducting a pilot with NCAR right now with our XRAS service. So if anybody who's ever in recent times tried to get an allocation on XSEDE resources, they've encountered this XRAS system. It's the XSEDE Resource Allocation Service. So you submit your allocation requests through that system. It also supports the full review and award processes necessary, pushes information out to the resource providers, service providers, so they can create local accounts and projects. And we have made that available now as a service for others to make use of. The folks in NCAR are adopting this and putting their own front end in it. It's developed in such a way to allow for that so that they can support the allocation of Yellowstone and other resources via NCAR. A recent discussion that Bill and I had is to adopt this system for the non-PRAC allocations of Blue Waters, and there's a number of these educational type allocations and some other things to support those processes. So we're looking to go down that road. And then I did want to mention collaborations with Blue Waters, and here's the curveball, Bill. I didn't warn you about this. You know, we've been taking this opportunity of the new funding round and some redefinition of what XSEDE is to pursue some other collaborative options between Blue Waters and XSEDE, and how we might be able to leverage what each project is doing across the projects. And one of the things that we're looking at, as I mentioned, is the XRAS support for the non-PRAC allocations. This might be something that would support perhaps an integration of PRAC and XRAC processes, something that would be interesting, and I think many people in the community would like to see to reduce the number of things that they need to do to gain access to all the resources that they need for their research purposes. But I also wanted to put a question to the group, so this is audience participation when you're completely dead at the end of the symposium, and we'll see how this goes. From the perspective of those who are making use of Blue Waters and perhaps other resources, potentially XSEDE, we're trying to identify in the community what are the sorts of things that you would like to see us consider for integration across the projects. You know, this allocations process is certainly one thing that various folks in the community have mentioned, but there are other things that both projects do. They do them in slightly different ways. It doesn't mean they're incompatible with one another. But if we are going to pursue additional collaborative activities, we really want to make sure that what those are bring value to the researchers, not just bring efficiencies to us, but actually help enable the community a little bit. So I'm going to put the question out to those who aren't sleeping at this point or already figuring out whether they're going to make their flights or not. Are there things that you see out there as options and opportunities for these two projects to work more closely together that would bring value to what you're doing? Scott wasn't ready for this necessarily either.
So, John, you didn't mention that Blue Waters and XSEDE has already worked out a range of activities that we do. That's right. That are collaborative, going from training workshops, other sessions, all the way through some of the technical things that we do. So there's about a 14 or 15 point set of things that I know our review committees have seen, and I think yours have too, where there is collaboration, even if it's not one project being completely integrated with the other. But there's a range of things that we already do, from training through supporting the teams to investigating some other stuff. So that's there as well.
Yeah, I didn't mean to skip that, but this was a slide I thought about doing just a little while ago. So there are a number of things that we are already doing together. Some of them are sort of behind the scenes, things that you wouldn't really know are going on. So for example, help desk staff who are supporting both the XSEDE Operations Center and Blue Waters. And so there's some of those things going on. Scott himself is a great example of this because he is actually 50% funded by XSEDE and 50% funded by Blue Waters, and facilitates some of these leveraging of training activities across the two projects. But Bob.
Yeah, so I can mention another is that Blue Waters for several years has paid to have an institute to train up to 20 undergraduates in multi-core, many-core. And for a couple of years we were using XSEDE resources while Blue Waters was coming online. And now it's flipped in the sense that the XSEDE scholars are going to come to the Blue Waters Institute to receive their multi-core, many-core training. So they'll be trained on Blue Waters even though they may end up running on some other target machine. So there's already this leveraging of education and training opportunities.
Deafening silence. I can pick on people, you know.
Another area that we've been doing, but certainly will expand, particularly as we go to 100 gigalinks and the XSEDE sites do, is working to make transfers and exchanges of things as efficient as we possibly can. So those are some of the behind-the-scene things.
Right. So as you can tell from what Bill's been mentioning, a lot of the things we've been working on these behind-the-scenes things where we can have greater efficiencies and leverage. What I was hoping to get was the perspective from folks who use these things. You know, are there things that we might do with respect to, say, data transfer services that would make your life easier? Would a unified allocations process make your life easier? Are there other things in which we can connect, other ways in which we can connect the projects that would just make your getting your work done easier?
You have mentioned the unified process of PRAC and XRAC, and the thought occurred to bring up that sometimes a request for allocation is submitted through PRAC and it isn't deemed to be big enough for Blue Waters. And so the recommendation is, well, just submit another, grant proposal to XSEDE. And now the researchers are faced with spending yet another month rewriting the grant to make it more appropriate for a whole different machine and a whole different environment, maybe in a different format and so forth. So that's a barrier, and actually having like a streamlined process where if you're rejected at PRAC, maybe just auto-submit to XSEDE to see if it will go through there, would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked a bit about that, Bill and I have, about the notion of this. Of course, doing that would require NSF concurrence on that because NSF holds the PRAC process today. But we could at least fantasize about a world in which a researcher might come to a single submission mechanism that provides a little guidance as to which the right platforms are, and perhaps thresholds above which things make sense to go to Blue Waters and below which they would go to XSEDE resources. They would almost certainly require differences in some of the review criteria depending on the targets. That's something that we can manage, but it's not, well, so what I'm hearing is at least if you fail in one, you want to be able to auto-submit to another. Would having a single process that you go through be helpful or not?
Because if the committee is going to say anyway, you know, go submit to XSEDE. They're already saying it.
Right.
So if the system were in place where a human being on that side could just push a button and it would be done, it would be a lot better for the researchers and it would be a lot better for the review committees as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you don't have to communicate between dozens of people as to what needs to be done.
Right. Well, and as it turns out, many of the reviewers on the PRAC are also on the XRAC, so they see these things already. And, yeah. Any other thoughts? Everybody wants to go take a nap or a walk. Okay. Well, I won't make it too painful. Just one last thing. Just because everybody loves to travel. I will invite you, extend an invitation to our annual meeting, which is at the end of July in St. Louis. A little bit more information here, the 26th through the 30th. So in late July, there will be many interesting things going on there. If you look at our XSEDE.org website, you can find out more information about the conference then. And then I will ask if there's any questions.